Good morning and welcome to our December 2020 JTEEN webinar. I'd love to just take a quick minute to explain to everybody what JTEEN is. We are an organization who works as a networking community of professionals working with Jewish teen educators and engagers. We work with community Hebrew high schools, we work with synagogues, we work with philanthropy organizations, we work with leadership organizations, JCCs, federations, and everything in between. So it's really just a great community all over the US, and we also have some partners in Israel as well. And we love to be able to have the opportunity to learn together, to share together, to embrace, support one another, and be there to guide each other as well, and also listen to each other kvetch. Like, that's always an important thing. So today we are so fortunate to have Dr. Kate Chick join us today for our presentation. Dr. Kate Chick is a psychologist who's worked with children and teenagers in a variety of settings: schools, community mental health centers, and in private practice. She received a master's degree in school psychology and a doctoral degree in child clinical psychology from Yeshiva University. Dr. Chick recently published her first book, Anxiety: The Ultimate Teen Guide, an excellent resource for teenagers and their families, which is available at Barnes & Noble and on Amazon. She's currently the school psychologist at Bicultural Hebrew Academy in Stamford, Connecticut, where she lives with her family. And without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Kate.
Thanks so much, Erica, and thank you, Danielle, for letting me know about this organization. Very exciting. So I'm going to share my screen here with you. Okay, so as Erica mentioned, I'm Dr. Kate Chick. I live in Stamford, Connecticut, where I've worked for the past 12 years with children, teens, families, parents. And I got the opportunity to work on this book about anxiety for teens and young adults. And so today what we're going to do is I'm going to be talking about anxiety in teenagers. First, just kind of reviewing some of the basics of anxiety, how it works, what it is, why we even have it in the first place. I'm sure this will be a review for some of you. Then we're going to go into the reasons, some of the reasons why teens are so anxious. Why is anxiety on the rise? And how are these factors exacerbated by the COVID pandemic? So even before COVID, we were seeing that teen and young adults were spiking, the numbers were spiking in levels of anxiety. By some measures, people say 1 in 3 teens have a diagnosable anxiety disorder. And now, of course, we're living in the COVID pandemic, and that has complicated things immensely. So we're going to talk about that. And then lastly, we'll discuss what we can do to help these teens, which really is the most important piece. Okay, here we go. So what is anxiety exactly? So the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is kind of the Bible of mental health diagnoses, defines anxiety disorders as having intense, excessive, and persistent worry and fear, and then kind of the behavioral disturbances that come with it. But the term can feel like a little bit nebulous because anxiety can look so different. It can come in so many different forms, right? Social anxiety feels very different than like a phobia of butterflies, or that can feel very different than a panic attack where someone's being, running to the ER because it feels like they're having a stroke. So there's really kind of a lot under the umbrella category of anxiety. But I want to take a step back and that definition and just think more broadly about what purpose anxiety serves, right? Why are we hardwired to have anxiety in the first place? So at its root, anxiety is the body's alarm system. It's kind of that feeling that something is endangering us, that something's not right, that, you know, we need to prepare to survive. And this is obviously very necessary for survival. If we did not have this sense of things endangering us, I mean, we would have been toast over the course of evolution, right? It would have been hard to survive. So this is actually a very important system. And how it works is we sense danger, and then our sympathetic nervous system kicks in. And that means that we get a flash flood of hormone. That we get a flash flood of hormones, of adrenaline, right? And it boosts our body's alertness and heart rate, and it sends extra blood to the muscles. It takes blood away from the organs that are not necessary for immediate survival, so like the digestive tract, and it sends that blood flow to organs that are going to be involved in intense physical activity. It's getting your body ready to face this danger. How are we going to face it? There are three possibilities. We're going to fight, we're going to run, or we're going to freeze and play dead and kind of hope for the best. And this is how our bodies have developed over time. This is the evolutionary response that we've kind of developed to face danger. So in sum, right, this alarm system is there to protect you. It's a good thing. But for people with anxiety, when we think about the term clinically, their alarm system is a little too sensitive, right? The calibration is off. They're sensing danger when there isn't danger, or they're misinterpreting stimuli to be dangerous when really they're neutral. So they're getting that same body reaction to, say, you know, a crowd of kids around a lunch table that they would be to like a lion in the Serengeti. They're having that fight or flight or freeze response in a situation that isn't actually a danger to them. So, you know, I mean, we say you can't be too careful, but is that really true, right? The calibration of their alarm system is off, which makes it very unhelpful. If you have an alarm system that's firing left and right, it's hard to know when there actually is danger and when there's not. So two psychologists, Robert Yerkes and John Dodson, in 1908, were studying mice. And what they found was that the relationship between arousal, kind of that alert, heightened state, right, and performance, how well you can accomplish things, was an inverse U. And I'll show you what that looks like. Right, so if we look at this graph over on the far left, so that's when there's no mental arousal or physical arousal, and our performance is very low because we're kind of like sleepy and unmotivated and, you know, just hanging out. So then we can't get anything done, right? So we need a certain amount of that arousal, of that, you know, oomph, of that anxiety to light a fire under us, to get us going. So you can see kind of that first half of the curve can be thought of as the energizing effect of arousal, right? And then you get to a point, the optimal amount, and that's when you're performing the best. You have just enough anxiety to kind of like kick you in the pants and get you going and get you motivated and doing things, right? But then what we see is if anxiety is increasing even more, if this arousal is increasing even more, then it becomes paralyzing. Then performance decreases again, because then we're too anxious and we can't do anything. So you don't want to have either too little or too much, because too little means we're completely unmotivated, and too much means that we're so paralyzed by, you know, kind of this arousal, by this alertness, that we can't get anything done either. When we talk about treating anxiety or helping kids with anxiety, we're not trying to eradicate anxiety entirely. We're not saying, if we had a magic wand, let's just get rid of anxiety, right? We might say that about depression or about, like, you know, hallucinations or something. But with anxiety, we actually need a certain amount of it in order to be successful, to perform well, to be motivated. So what we're really trying to do is to help teens get to that optimal level. We're trying to recalibrate that alarm system so that it's exactly the right amount to motivate us, but not to overwhelm us. Okay, so here's the $1 million question. why are teens so anxious, right? And I did a lot of research on this when I was writing my book, and truthfully, the jury's still out on this. But when I was researching, I came across a lot of different theories, which certainly resonated with me, and there's been some research to back up. So I'm going to talk through a few of these. So first, let's look at the rising anxiety in teens pre-COVID pandemic. So, think back kind of before 9 months ago. Why was there this phenomenon of anxiety rising in teens? And even then, you couldn't pass a newsstand without seeing some cover that said, why are our teens so anxious, or teen anxiety is on the rise. So why is that? Okay, so here are a couple theories. First theory is adolescence is a time of transition. So this is certainly true, right? Adolescence is a time of transition, and transitions make us anxious. Just picture the first day of school, the first day of a new job, dropping a kid off at camp for the first time, right? For the most part, we're creatures of habit. And so any major change is going to feel uncomfortable. And for teens, they're going through not just one change, but a lot of changes at once, right? The physical, the emotional, the hormones. They're developing, romantic relationships. They're developing a whole new sense of self separate from their families. So this is huge, right? So for those kids who have always been a little hardwired to err on the anxious side of things, this is a time in their lives that anxiety may start to spike because of all these changes happening. But that's nothing new, right? People have been having to transition to adolescence and to adulthood for as long as there have been people. So what's new about today's teens? So one piece is the academics. According to a recent study, academics was the top stressor identified by teenagers. And when we look at kind of the world of academics, and you work with teens, some of you, work as educators, the academic world has sped up a lot. Compare kindergarten now to how it was 20 years ago or 50 years ago. It's very different, right? Expectations are very high and they start early. Many subjects are leveled starting at a young age. First grades look more like second grades. Kindergartens look more like first grades used to. And for kids for whom school is difficult, they are aware very early that it's a problem, that school is difficult for them. So there is an intense amount of pressure, and that can raise anxiety. And what's interesting is that we see anxiety both in the kids for whom school is very hard and for the kids for whom school is very easy. Because even for those kids, you think, oh, well, they shouldn't be anxious about school. They're so good at it. But then for those kids, right, the expectations are even higher. They feel like they have to have perfect grades or they won't go to the top college. It's not enough to get A's, they have to excel at everything across the board, right? So what we're seeing is kind of, even on all ends of the spectrum, academics can be a very big stressor for teens. Okay, the next one is use of screen time. Ooh, this is a big one. So psychologist Dr. Jean Twenge wrote a book called iGen, which if you work with teenagers, I highly recommend. And what she found in her research was that teens spend almost all their leisure time on screens, not with friends in person, less time doing structured activities or just hanging out, right? And in her research, what she found was that those teens who do spend more time on screens are more likely to feel lonely, to feel depressed, suicidal. And by the way, this phenomenon has been totally shown with adults too, where like hours of Facebook use was directly linked to feelings of unhappiness and depression. So we're not immune either. And in contrast, those kids who were spending more time with friends in person were significantly less likely to be unhappy or worried or lonely and all of that. So we see a direct link between anxiety and screen time, screen use. And it makes sense when we think about it. When we think about social media, I don't know how many of you saw The Social Dilemma on HBO, but it paints a pretty grim picture, right, about what social media does to our mental health. And, kind of what we've learned about how girls post on social media, and actually it's been shown that girls post differently than boys do, But how girls post is that they tend to show in their pictures how good their lives are, right? They show pictures where they look pretty, where they're with their friends, where they're in a cool place or doing something cool. And so for everybody else looking at these posts, it really raises anxiety, right? It's like, why are, ugh, every time I see that girl's post, she looks so pretty, or she always has it together. Why does everyone have it together and I don't? Or why am I the only one who's struggling? Right? It's kind of this effect of making everybody's lives look perfect. Social media is also an easy platform to bully or to exclude. We've certainly seen that. Girls cutting each other out of pictures before they're posted, or commenting on certain pictures and not on others. How many likes did you get? Or commenting in a mean way, cyberbullying. And the really the straw that kind of breaks the camel's back is that social media is 24/7. We have no break from it. And when you think about, there were always going to be social drama among teens. But if you think about it pre-social media, right? Maybe you had a fight with a friend, or maybe there was some kind of weird interaction in school, or someone was mean. But then you had, from 3:30 until 8 a.m. the next day to kind of process, to talk to your mom, to call a friend, to think about it, and to get a break from it. And now there is no break, right? These teens are oftentimes taking their devices to bed with them and waking up early or getting alerts in the middle of the night. And it is constant, constant stimulation. So that's going to raise anxiety. Okay, communication. Communication is one of the biggest ways to actually manage anxiety. It's one of the biggest antidotes to anxiety, which, talking through problems is the basis of most kinds of therapy. So now what we're seeing is that kids talking is actually happening on devices, right? It's not happening in person, and usually it's not happening on the phone. It's happening via text or Snapchat or group chats, things like that. And we even use the same terms, right? We say, I'm talking to someone or I'm chatting with someone. But in fact, it's actually really different because we're not actually talking through and processing thoughts in the same way. So it's a really different kind of conversation and communication. And also, when we communicate face to face with people, we're practicing and honing certain skills, right? We're carrying on a conversation, we're joking around, we're figuring out how to read people's intentions, like, oh, what did they mean by that? And we're figuring out how to empathize with someone, the right moment to empathize, how to resolve conflict, right? All of these things are what lay the groundwork for close relationships, which is another big antidote to anxiety. And unfortunately, online communications are just not a good substitute for that. Talking online does not serve to diffuse anxiety in the same way. So we've got talking and friendships as two antidotes to anxiety, and we see how social media is kind of undermining them both. So increased anxiety, decreased ability to cope. Okay, a few more. Exposure to information. So there's just a lot of information out there, right? Too much information. And it's certainly not always age appropriate, and we get no break from it, right? You get alerts on your phone all the time. You're scrolling through feeds, videos are popping up. It's like constant. And we're exposed to information that's not filtered in any way. So teens are often exposed to graphic or disturbing content, ISIS beheadings or graphic pornography or mass shootings, or right, like things are popping up left and right. I don't know if you said there was recently a TikTok video circulating of a man who commits suicide on camera by shooting himself in the head. Extremely graphic, is extremely disturbing. And this was just like popping up on kids' feeds, right? Because it's an automatic thing on TikTok. You don't actually have to click on it, it just pops right up. And so teens are seeing this, being exposed to things that they're not mature enough or prepared to handle in any way. So this can be a major source of anxiety and even kind of trauma sometimes. Okay, two more. There's no roadmap to today's teenage world. So, when we think previously, there was always a sense that the elders of society, our parents, our grandparents, our teachers, right, could help with navigating kind of any problem because they've been there, they've been through this before, right? And today there's a sense that it's hard to know if parents or teachers or grandparents could really help navigate the teenage landscape, right? What do they know about Twitter or Snapchat or Tinder or, kind of how things work now? And what teens are experiencing often feels very foreign to parents. I get parents all the time calling me like, I just don't know how to help my child with this. And this sense is very anxiety inducing for parents and teens. We're going down this road and nobody knows how to navigate it. And that's scary for everybody involved. As much as teens don't want to admit it, they would want to know that they can go to their parents for guidance. And in today's world, they're not so sure. Okay, last one, a culture of safetyism. So today we live in a time and place where mental health concerns are for the most part understood, respected, out there, people talk about them, right? Which I think is 100% a good thing, 99% a good thing. But in an effort to make people feel comfortable, we sometimes fall into the trap of making too many accommodations, helping people to avoid risk or conflict at all costs, right? We adopt the mindset that if it makes you feel uncomfortable or unsafe or even emotionally unsafe, you shouldn't have to do it, right? We should have trigger warnings on everything. You should be able to opt out of everything. And although this is well intentioned, helping teens to avoid topics they find triggering or even potentially upsetting is definitely counterproductive, because as we know, most forms of treatment for anxiety are some form of exposure, of helping the child face the things that they fear over and over until you habituate and it no longer sparks that anxiety. But here we are kind of helping people to avoid the things that they find uncomfortable. So what we're seeing with this generation of teenagers is, because of this culture of safetyism we've created, they haven't really developed any tolerance for struggle or for being out of their comfort zones. So without strengthening those muscles, any small challenge or any kind of upsetting thing that we come across feels very huge and overwhelming, right? Higher anxiety. So the irony is that by trying to protect our kids, we're actually leaving them less resilient and more vulnerable to those feelings of anxiety. Okay, so now let's take a step back and look at things through the pandemic lens, since that's the world we live in, unfortunately. So on its own, right, COVID-19 is a stressor that could peak a teen's anxiety. There's fears about health, fears about financial stability of their family, fears about the future, all kinds of things. But I want to look back specifically at the factors we just mentioned, but through the lens of our pandemic world. Okay, so adolescence is a time of transition. That was the first one. So still true, but how much more anxiety inducing to go through this transition during a pandemic, right? There's a real sense of loss around these transitions. No graduation parties, no proms, just, not just finding their new sense of self, but having to redefine everything they thought would be included in that sense of self because of COVID. So, how did they picture their senior year of high school, their last year of college, their first job, right? All of that is now changing and different. And so that's a lot to come to terms with. Academia. If teens thought academics were stressful before, right? Now it's 100% online. So it's like we've completely turned things on their head. So all the knowledge that teens had acquired about how to be successful in school, kind of what about school made it comfortable for them, now they're having to relearn kind of what can help them be successful online. So any stress that was there before with school, now for sure magnified. Use of screen time. So we already know being online raises anxiety. And so, previously, pre-pandemic, if I talk to parents, I've said things like, just make sure to get your kids off their devices and outside, hanging out, playing sports, take up new hobbies, right? But now everything is online. School is online, extracurriculars are online, social lives are online. There's no break from that screen time. So again, all the anxiety to do with it, magnified. Communication, right? Kind of the flip side of that. The teens have even less time now in this pandemic to have those face-to-face connections with their friends, the heart-to-hearts, the hanging out time, right? It's all happening online, which makes that communication really hard. exposure to information. So now on top of all other kinds of disturbing information we were seeing, now the information about COVID is everywhere, and it's exhausting and depressing, right? Even as adults, it's exhausting. The numbers are going up, the numbers are bad, people are sick, people are dying, Americans are dying every day. You know, there's a huge super spreader event, right? It's like a lot to digest, and we have no break from it. Okay, there's no roadmap. Boy, truer words were never spoken. This is now true for all of us, right? What roadmap do we have to navigating a pandemic? Not a good one. And lastly, a culture of safetyism. So this pandemic has really turned our ideas about safety kind of on their heads, because we really have no idea what is safe anymore, how to navigate this, you know. Do we need to wipe down the groceries? Is it safe to get together, right? Everybody's feels like their kind of alarm system is calibrated a little bit oddly now, because we don't really know what is dangerous and what is not. And that's very worrisome. Okay, so now let's get to kind of the most important part, which is how can we help? How can we help these teens? So now that we've identified these stressors, which as we see are just magnified and exacerbated by the COVID situation, what can we as parents, as teachers, as mental health professionals do to help? Where can we start with this? So certainly many kinds of treatment have been shown to help anxiety. There's tons of research out there: therapy, medication, meditation, mindfulness, self-help books, hobbies, even therapy for parents. Actually, there's some really interesting research coming out of Yale that if a parent goes to therapy for help with their kids' anxiety, it is as effective as if the teen went to therapy themselves. Very interesting. Anyway, but you know, if you're not the child's parent, or even if you are, you may be thinking, okay, but what am I doing specifically to help this child, right? So something to consider is that there are many overlapping parts to a teen's world, many influences, many spheres in which the teen exists. And this can make change feel overwhelming, you know, like, I'm just his coach, what can I do? Or I only see him half an hour a week, or I only see him in a school setting, but the truth is, like, often by shifting one piece of a teen's life, it can cause a shift to the whole system. So just as an example, maybe a teen who feels better supported at school then may feel more confident socially, seek out closer friendships, spend less time on social media and more time with more meaningful friends, right? You can start to see kind of a positive snowball effect. So I'd like to go back through that list of stressors we identified for the last time, I promise, and look at some possible ways that you can help and affect change. Okay, so let's start with there's no roadmap. So this is still true. We don't have a roadmap, but the best thing we can do is learn as much as we can, right? So as with any problem, educating yourself is huge, right? In therapy, this is called psychoeducation. It's usually a big part of any treatment, because having an understanding of anxiety and the ins and outs of how it goes a long way towards helping it. But this is true of anything, right? Educate yourself about teens' social media world, educate yourself about teens' virtual school, educate yourself about, you know, different ways that you might help the teen, listen to podcasts, seeking out mental health professionals. You know, it may not be as clear a roadmap or as detailed as we'd like, but it certainly kind of points us in the right direction. And I tell this to parents all the time. You know, the more they can know about their child's world, the more they can be helpful. Okay, adolescence is a time of transition. So, you know, obviously we can't control some of these factors. The teens are still going to explore the different parts of their identity. One thing we can do is make sure that this transition is kind of as healthy as can be, the healthiest possible way that they're doing this. Because a lot of times, you know, we talk a lot about mental health, but the teens' physical health and what they are you know, what they're doing with their bodies has a huge impact on mental health. And it's sometimes something that can be overlooked, right? Anxiety is directly linked to how we're taking care of our bodies. And as teens, the truth is a lot of times these things go out the window, right? They eat junk food, they pull all-nighters, they have caffeine, they have monster drinks to stay awake, or they smoke or vape or use substances or party. Um, some teens use substances as a way to self-medicate. But what the research has found, not surprisingly, is that all these substances cause our brain to function very poorly. Our memory suffers, our ability to focus suffers, we become more emotional, we're less resilient. So for somebody who's already kind of on the emotional end of things, they're really setting themselves up for increased anxiety if they're using these substances in their bodies. They're really not going to be at the top of their game. So here are some things to do. So making sure the teen has a balanced diet, and depending on the role you play in the teenager's life, this may be a question of working with the parent. This may be a question of speaking directly with the teens. But making sure the teen has a balanced diet is huge. Avoiding caffeine and stimulants. I know, coffee is such a part of our culture, but for people who are already running on too high a gear, coffee is the absolute worst. Actually, monster drinks are the absolute worst because that's kind of very concentrated coffee and can kick off panic attacks, can kick off all kinds of extreme anxiety, right? Because what caffeine does, it's speeding up your system in the same way, right? It's getting your heart rate up. It's can cause a lot of the same symptoms of anxiety, and really can bring on full-blown panic attacks. Okay, making sure the child is eating enough. A lot of fad diets have people skipping meals, restricting, but they need fuel to get through the day, and good fuel. So making sure that they're eating kind of good brain food. Making sure they're sleeping enough. This is a big one. Not taking devices into bed. Anxiety often spikes at nighttime anyway. And when teens are, snuggled up, falling asleep to watching, WhatsApp chats go by, it for sure affects their sleep. And I can't tell you how many times I've had, 8th grade students come in and they're like all panicked and all, just super anxious morning. And they're like, I don't know what's going on. I'm just freaking out. I'm freaking out. And then after they sit with me for a while, they say like, I think I'm just really tired. I didn't sleep well. And you really see how these things can spiral quickly. Avoiding substance use is certainly a big one as well. So, again, depending on your role with the teenagers, it may be a question of working with the families or working with the teenager directly, or helping the teenager understand these effects on their body. Like, I know that you like the idea of this kind of fad diet where you don't eat till noon. But what I'm seeing is that then in the morning, I feel like it really affects your mood. And then that makes it really hard for you to get through the morning. So I'm wondering if that's really the best thing, right? Helping them make the connections. Okay, academics. If the child has anxiety, they should certainly have a team approach to their academics, especially as they get older, middle school, high school, college, right? The education tends to kind of come from many disparate sources at that point. And it's very important to make sure that everyone is on the same page. I work in a school, so I see this a lot where, maybe the parent has talked to one teacher about it or a different teacher about it. But then you'll have somebody who knows nothing about this, like, who knows, the basketball coach steps in and says like, ugh, what are you crying about? Like, get going here. And, it just has like no idea where this is coming from and can respond in a really unhelpful way. So it's so important to make sure that everybody is on the same page, including the teen, to know kind of what accommodations they're getting, and what they need in school. So in a public school, that might look like an IEP or a 504 plan. Most private schools have their own kind of version of that, but just making sure that everybody is on the same page, whether it's formal accommodations or whether it's just kind of knowing what this child needs in terms of emotional support. Okay, use of screen time and communication. So it's just incredibly important to set limits with screen time. And sometimes, again, that has to come from the parents, depending on kind of the age of the teen. And sometimes if the teen is older, it has to come from them. They have to be encouraged to set limits for themselves. It's very hard to do, but it's very necessary, right? That's what the social dilemma was about. This technology is built to be addictive, to keep you clicking. And it's just incredibly important to set those limits. And then hand in hand with that, it's important to make sure the teen has other outlets for communication. And I know this is hard with COVID protocols, but encourage the teen to pick up the phone and talk to someone that way, rather than texting. See if they can hang out outside and go for a walk, or have some COVID safe way to be face to face. When COVID guidelines loosen up, more in-person hangouts, more sleepovers, right? You're just trying to encourage that face-to-face communication, which we know is so, so, so helpful. Exposure to information. So this is much the same, right? We need to set boundaries around this for ourselves as adults and for teens. So turn off the news alerts on the phone, right? Limit the number of articles you can click on, all of that stuff. Check in with the teen about what kind of news articles they've been reading, what they thought about them, kind of give them a little time and space to process, right? We click through things so quickly. We're reading all this information. But they need time to talk it through, to think about it, to process it. It can be helpful to share your own process with them about kind of how you set limits around this to keep from getting overwhelmed. Actually, at a recent faculty meeting, our head of school said to the faculty, oh, how are you all taking care of yourselves? And one person said, oh, I stopped reading the news. And everyone kind of like laughed. But he wasn't kidding. It had helped him to set a limit and take some space and just not look at the news for, some period of time to kind of get back to having a little more sense of calm. He felt like it was making him too anxious. Okay, and lastly, a culture of safetyism. So we can't change this about our culture, right? And honestly, I'm not sure we'd want to, because overall, as I said, I do think it's a very good thing that we kind of push for feelings of safety and support. But what we do want to do is foster resilience in teens rather than feelings of fragility, feelings like, if I don't have this, I'll just fall apart, right? I don't know what I'll do. So helping teens not to take the easy way out, and avoid things that make them feel anxious, since we know that avoidance only perpetuates anxiety. But instead, we're trying to encourage them to face the things gradually that they find worrisome, and realize through that experience their own strength and their own ability to do so, that they will not fall apart, that they are stronger than they think they are. Right? The goal, the child's goal, the parent's goal, right? Your goal for the child cannot be for them to feel kind of safe and comfortable and all the time, right? If that's the goal, it needs to be reevaluated. The goal should be that for them to feel strong and resilient and capable and supported, right? So that whatever curveball life is throwing at them, they will be in a position there where they're able to handle it, to grow from it, to really face it head on, right? That's what we're trying to do. There's an old saying, you shouldn't prepare the road for your child, you should prepare your child for the road, right? And that's what we're trying to do. It's great to help the child, but we don't want to make so many accommodations that we're just preparing the road all the time and not actually preparing the child. Okay, so to that end, I think it's important to think about two concepts. One is validation and one is having confidence. So validating is making the child feel heard, right? Not saying things like, don't worry about it, or why do you always worry, or like, forget about it, right? Because the truth is they are worried. So, by just saying, don't worry, it's not helpful to them. And it's kind of just showing them that you don't understand them, right? There's an internet meme that says, never in the history of calming down has anyone ever calmed down by being told to calm down, right? And it's true. It's like not helpful at all. So a big piece of it is validating their experience. Wow, I can see you are so worried about this. It feels very big, very scary to you. Tell me more about that. right? I know you're trying not to worry about this, but your brain is still telling you it's something bad you need to be thinking about. So let's talk it through a little more, right? Trying to understand where they're coming from, what they're feeling about it. Okay, but then the other piece of it is having confidence in the child. It's saying, but I know you can do this. I am sure you can do this, right? And again, as adults, we have to just check our own instincts. Like, do we feel the child needs protection? Do we feel the urge to protect them? Because if so, we need to kind of check that instinct. Because when we're helping teens, what we're trying to do is strike a balance between these two things, between having confidence in them and validating their experience. We don't want to only validate so much so that the child just feels hopeless, like, oh, this is a big problem. And, all mom did was sit there and agree with me, But we don't want to have so much confidence saying, like, oh, buck up, it's easy, like, don't even, right? When it's clearly not easy for the teen. And then it just makes them feel, again, kind of like disconnected from you, misunderstood. So it's kind of like a very fine line, kind of an art form of walking this line when you're working with teens. And you may want to think, kind of as an educator, as a parent, which side do you tend to err on? And is it working? And do you need to shift a little bit? Do you tend to be more of the person who's just sitting there, rubbing their back and saying, oh, I know it's so hard, right? Are you like more that person? Are you more the person who's like, well, just get going, come on, like stiff upper lip. Are those strategies working for you, or do you need to kind of shift a little bit to be more in the middle? So here's an example, right? A child feels awkward in social situations. They never want to go, maybe it's at school, maybe it's at Hebrew school, maybe it's at soccer practice. I don't know. They just feel completely awkward. So as a professional, as a parent, how do you validate and how do you convey a sense of confidence, right? How do you walk that line with this child? Any ideas? Put it out to the crowd here. You can unmute. Well, an example of validation, right, would be, I know these types of situations are so stressful to you. I can imagine that feels so tough, right? And an example of the confidence piece would be, I have seen you do this before though, and I know you can do it. Even though it feels so stressful, I can see how once you're out there playing soccer, you are great. You're with the other girls, you're passing to them, you're part of the team, right? I've seen you do it before. You're very good at it, right? So it's kind of walking that line. It's so hard to go into this situation. I know it's so stressful for you, and I know you can do it, right? It's those two pieces. Okay, so out of all these stressors and topics that I've talked about, I'm sure some may kind of resonate with you more than others, and you can kind of give some thought, and we're going to open it up for questions in a mere moment. But, my goal here is to kind of give you tools for your toolbox working with teens. So I want to quickly just talk about kind of how you can help a child in the moment, because a lot of times parents say, okay, those are good things to think about, kind of big picture, long term, but how can I help my child in the moment? She's freaking out. She's refusing to do something. She's in the middle of class, just had a panic attack. I can see the anxiety. What do I do? So this is just a list of strategies for helping someone in the moment. Okay, I'm just going to talk through them quickly. Making contact, right? If someone is so much in their head, is freaking out, it's making contact, is helping them get grounded again, having a conversation, making eye contact, bringing them back, right? Wait, look at me, look at my face. Yeah, okay. So here's what I was thinking, right? Even just having them focus on you, on your mouth, on what you're saying, right? It's getting them out of their head, bringing them back down to earth. Same with grounding techniques, right? what do you see on the wall? How does the chair feel under you, right? What are you smelling next door? Is that, the class baking cookies, right? Getting them using the five senses to kind of bring them back out of their head and kind of down to earth. Physical movement can be really helpful for some kids. Some kids I won't even try to talk to. I'll just say, let's just start walking. And they can't talk for 5 minutes as they walk. And then eventually just the walking helps calm them down. Deep breathing, this can be helpful for some, not others. There are lots of apps that do this, like Breathe to Relax, where you can kind of watch the graphic and breathe along with it. The Mammalian diving reflex, this is kind of a trick that it just so happens in mammals that when your face gets wet, specifically, I think it's kind of like the nose area, it creates this cardiovascular response where your heart rate slows and kind of redirects blood back to your vital organs. And it's kind of like an instant relaxation response. So, for a long time, I think people just said splash cold water on your face, but didn't know exactly why. Well, this is why. That's why that works. And then distracting them and, again, finding something funny, sometimes even just watching a dumb YouTube video can get them kind of back out of it, or, just kind of like help them come out of whatever they're feeling in that moment that can be very intense. And just lastly, a few things to keep in mind. And then I'm going to stop and ask for questions because I know we're almost out of time. So just a few key things that I want to impart. One is anxiety is not logical. I can't stress this enough. I hear a lot from parents, things like, well, last time she was okay staying home by herself, but now she's freaking out about staying home by herself. It makes no sense. Or, before she was just fine taking tests in class, and now she's melting down that she needs a separate room or whatever it is, right? But anxiety isn't logical, right? You're not going to use logic to help the teen understand why now they are okay taking a test in class, right? It doesn't work that way. So that's going to be an exercise in futility if you're kind of trying to reason with them. Different things work for different kids. This is huge. This is really huge. I mean, we went through a lot here, but if there's one takeaway, I would say it's that, there's going to be a lot of trial and error helping kids with anxiety, because what works for one kid will not work for the next kid, even if they have identical symptoms. Even CBT, which is by many considered to be the gold standard, only works very well for about half of kids. And nobody knows why. Nobody knows why it works for some and not others. So, don't get discouraged as the professional or as the parent if something, if you had put stock in something working and it's not working, you're going to have to pivot. Change is really hard. We all know that. Think how many New Year's resolutions kind of go by the wayside, right? Change is always hard. And true change takes a long time. So even if we've tried it for a month and it's just, we're not seeing anything, true change takes a long time. I've had the other reverse too, where sometimes parents are like, oh, I tried this and, now this week it's cured. And I think like, well, then it's a good week, but chances are it's going to come back, right? Because true change takes a very long time. It's also not linear, right? So prepare for setbacks, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And any progress is good progress. So really giving the team credit. Even if you feel like frustrated that, well, we've been working on this for 6 months already and all they can do is this, well, okay, they can do that now and they couldn't do it before. So that's a really big piece. So all right, now I'm going to open it up to questions. 7 minutes left. This is the information for my book. I hope you would find it helpful, or if you know teens who would find it helpful. It's really written for teens to read, but also for parents of teens. It can be really helpful also. It has a lot of information in there. Very readable, not textbooky. So yeah, now I'd like to open it up to questions or comments.
Yeah, I just want to make sorry.
Sorry, Erica, you go.
Okay. Quick comment is I loved the things that you recommended for helping in the moment. I think a lot of us are with teens in specific moments, not necessarily all the time. And it could be in our Hebrew High program, it could be, you know, at a convention when conventions happen again, you know, or it could be just a text, you know, late at night. And I think to have some of those strategies at our fingertips are really, really helpful. So thank you for sharing those.
I was going to ask about language choice. Sorry, I can't turn my camera on. I'm in the car. When it comes to the difference between saying, like, someone has anxiety, and in this particular moment, someone's reacting to just a momentary overwhelmedness. I've been having a lot of conversations with my team lately about not using overly, in my opinion, alarmist language. There's a colleague on my team who is so quick to say, oh, he's so depressed, he has depression. And I'm jumping in to say, he's not depressed, he's upset, he's disappointed about a specific instance that, you know, there's a pandemic, there are, you know, disappointments and things that are upsetting. And then the same thing I'll come up of so-and-so, oh, they have anxiety. And I'm just kind of wondering where you see as the boundary, or if I'm making too big of a deal out of nuances between the difference between saying this particular teen has anxiety and this particular teen is nervous about a test.
Sure. And that's a great point. I mean, you know, it's interesting. A lot of this language is used both clinically and casually. So even from teens, I'll hear them say, oh, I'm so depressed, right? Would they qualify for clinical depression? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But they use the term, you know, they'll say, you know, I'm anxious or I'm depressed or, you know, or like psychotic. That's another one sometimes people use, right? This is psychotic, right? And that's a clinical term, but people use it kind of casually. So it's a good point. You know, as in order to meet qualifications for a diagnosable anxiety disorder, right, there are certain kind of boxes that need to be checked. It needs to be kind of over a period of time. It needs to be a certain number of symptoms and affecting different spheres of their life. So you're right. I think kind of as I think it can function as both. I'm hesitant to say, you know, oh, this child has an anxiety disorder unless they've actually been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, or this child, you know, has depression unless they've actually been diagnosed with depression. However, I don't think using the term anxiety, even if it doesn't qualify for a clinical diagnosis, I think it can still be helpful. You know, the same as like panic, right? This child, you know, is having a panic attack. Do they qualify for a panic disorder? You know, maybe not. But it can just be kind of helpful language to use because it means, you know, something to people. If you feel like your team kind of has other language that that can be used instead, that's fine too. But I don't, you know, I don't necessarily see the problem saying, you know, oh, this kid is feeling so anxious about that, and that should only be reserved that if you kind of have a diagnosable disorder. Because, you know, I think it describes what it is. It may not be ongoing or prevalent enough or kind of be in enough spheres to garner a diagnosis, but it does describe how they're feeling kind of in that time.
Maybe the issue is, Samantha, being concerned about staff labeling certain things, that maybe maybe a teen isn't saying certain things, but a staff member is giving it a label that, you know, they don't necessarily, you know, that doesn't necessarily fit the situation, or certainly isn't, you know, an official diagnosis, and being concerned about whether that gets translated to the teen.
Right, I would agree. But like, I appreciate everything that was said about the way the teens, you know, label themselves and like their word choice. I was, like Erica said, speaking more on the staff level, that it's made me uncomfortable to be in a meeting talking about a teen where someone ascribes to them something that, again, if they have it, great. We need to know, we need to deal with it, and be proactive in that sense. But to give kind of these labels to the teen based on a very momentary, like, there's a pandemic, your winter break trip was canceled, you're bummed. To me, that's not depression. That's and when we say that about them, it's just been an uncomfortable space.
Right. So there have been times, I agree with you. There have been times when, with staff, they'll say things like, "Oh, this kid is so ADD." And I'm like, what do you mean by that? Like, do you feel like they're very hyperactive? Do you feel like they can't focus on things? Right. Which may be what they're saying, but they use the label ADD, which, first of all, isn't even the correct label, but is a clinical term, right? That's a diagnosable thing. And so, and I think it's the same with this stuff. Sometimes people will say like, oh, she's majorly anxious, and sometimes it just takes some unpacking, like, oh, what do you mean by that? Like, what are you seeing that makes you say that? And it might be it might be, oh, she just seems nervous all the time, or it might be she's just checked out, or it might be, she's quick to tears, or it might be, right? But unpacking it is often more helpful than using that term in the first place. So I agree with you.
I just got a quick question. First of all, thank you so much for putting this together. This is incredible.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
So I work with teens that are more teen leaders. So they're like the top-notch kids in high school, the ones that are taking the AP classes and so on and so forth. And in that mindset, those kind of teens, there's this pressure of living up to some standard. Sometimes we're doing it for the wrong reasons of why they're so good and so on and so forth. But my question is more like when I see that a teen is taking on too much, and I want to relate to them, to explain to them that, hey, it's okay to feel anxiety, to be stressed about this. Like, don't feel like you have to fit into this shoe just because of the pressure. Is there a time and a place for that? Is there a way of doing that? Or do you think there's a proper way? Like, instead of, because sometimes with some teens are mature enough where I can just tell them, okay, it's okay to freak out. Like, even though, you know what I mean? But some teens will have that ego blocking them, where the moment me as their advisor, where sometimes I look up to, it's more of like, if I tell them it's okay, they're like, but I'm not, I'm good. It's like that ego that's blocking them. How would you kind of
I see this a lot also. I now that I'm in a private Jewish day school, it's a lot of very high functioning teens with a lot of pressure. And a lot of times they do not want to let their guard down. They don't want to say I'm freaked out, right? They just want to say I'm fine, to their detriment. And so I think it's a great question. Oftentimes what I'll do in those situations is not say kind of like you specifically, like, wow, you seem freaked out, right? But just kind of like noticing, like, wow, you were talking to me about, there's this big social thing and dynamic that's like, ooh, that sounds like a lot. And wow, college applications, and oh, wow, it's a lot. Feels like a lot. I feel like it's a lot, right? And not kind of putting it on them, like, you seem really anxious, or you seem, right? But just kind of like reflecting back to them, like, wow, like, as you're saying all this stuff, like, I'm just noticing how much it is. That seems like a lot. I could see where someone would just, find that like to be really a lot, I mean, I know you can handle it, but it's a lot, right? And just kind of like chipping away a little bit at this idea that, that it's not a lot, that they can kind of handle everything perfectly. But just validating for them that, it feels like, listening to them, like, it seems like a lot. And then just seeing where they go with it. Some of them will say, like, nope, it's fine. And some of them will be like, it is a lot. And, kind of run with that now that you've opened the door. It depends on the kids. Another thing that can be helpful with teens that I found is kind of seeking their advice on general teen problems. So saying like, I've been thinking about, and you're a teen leader, and I see all these teens, right? And they have so much going on, like it's a lot, and the pressure with colleges and kind of, and with this and with that and school and extracurriculars. What advice would you even give to those teens? Like, what do you think? Like, what's a good thing what do you think would work? And kind of partnering with them. So you're not talking about them. You're not saying like, and you seem really stressed, right? Where they might put their guard up, but kind of partnering with them to say like, what do you think would help teens? And then they're much more likely to say, oh, you're right. I did notice these, 3 girls were really stressed. And, I bet like if we, I just feel like they need, X, Y, and Z. So sometimes that can work also if you, again, I think teens are much more likely to talk about others more than
No, I
themselves.
got that point. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, I know that we've had a few people sign off to head over to their next Zoom webinar. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Kate Chick, for all of the information. The research was really helpful in providing that foundation, and your examples and just sort of walking through all of those things and what they look like both in the everyday world and more specifically in the pandemic world. So thank you for joining us. Danielle, thank you for connecting us. We really appreciate it.
If you have questions that came up that I didn't get to answer, please reach out. I'd be more than happy to talk to you.
Wonderful, wonderful. And just a quick reminder, our next webinar is in January 21st at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. It is on the power of professional mentorship, and it will be the official launch of JTEEN's very first mentorship initiative. So stay tuned. Lots of really great stuff on the horizon. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a great last night of Hanukkah, and Happy New Year as well.
Thanks.
Thank you.